ABC Kinderteach presents The Little House, written by Virginia Lee Burton. Once upon a time, there was a little house way out in the country. She was a pretty little house, and she was strong and well built. The man who built her so well said, "This little house shall never be sold for gold or silver, and she will live to see our great-great-grandchildren's great-great-grandchildren living in her." So he's saying, we will never sell this house. It's going to stay in our family forever and ever. The little house was very happy as she sat on the hill and watched the countryside around her. That's the land outside of town, countryside. She watched the sun rise in the morning, and she watched the sun set in the evening. Day followed day, each one a little different from the one before, but the little house stayed just the same. So you see the sun's rising, and it's rising, and then it's setting. In the nights, she watched the moon grow from a thin new moon to a full moon, and then back again to a thin old moon. So this is what's happening, is the moon looks like this, and it gets a little bit brighter, it keeps getting brighter, it gets full, and then it starts to get a little bit thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner until it's gone. Way off in the distance, which means far away, she could see the lights of the city. The little house was curious about the city and wondered what it would be like to live there. So this house is out in the country away from the city, but do you think the house will ever see the city? Because it doesn't have wheels. It can't stand up and walk away, so I wonder if it will ever see the city. How would that be possible? Time passed quickly for the little house as she watched the countryside slowly change with the seasons. In the spring, when the days grew longer and the sun warmer, she waited for the first robin to return from the south. Robin birds, they fly south in the winter where it's warmer, and then in the spring they fly back up north. She watched the grass turn green. She watched the buds on the trees swell. And there are buds on a tree, and they get swelling, just means they get bigger and bigger. And the apple trees burst into blossom. And here are blossoms on a tree, not necessarily an apple tree, but blossoms are just flowers on a tree. She watched the children playing in the brook. And a brook is like a stream or a creek, and there's an example of a brook. And that's supposed to be the brook in the picture right there. And you see there's no cars. They're riding around on horses and buggies or carriages. In the long summer days, she sat in the sun and watched the trees cover themselves with leaves, and the white daisies cover the hill. And so this is supposed to be white daisies, and here's what they really look like right there. She watched the gardens grow, and she watched the apples turn red and ripen. She watched the children playing in the pool. So there's some children playing in some water. There's looks like some apple trees and some cattle. In the fall, when the days grew shorter and the nights colder, she watched the first frost turn the leaves to bright yellow and orange and red. And so when we talk about the first frost, this is what frost looks like. It's when the grass and the things outside, when it gets cold out, they get little icicles on them. She watched the harvest gathered, which means you pick the food from the plants, and the apples picked. She watched the children going back to school. It looks like the mom's waving goodbye and the kids have their books and they're getting ready to hop on this little buggy to go to school. In the winter, when the nights were long and the days short and the countryside covered with snow, she watched the children coasting and skating. Year after year, the apple trees grew old and new ones were planted. The children grew up and went away to the city, and now at night the lights of the city seemed brighter and closer. The city seems brighter and closer. I wonder if it is getting closer. Maybe it's growing. Maybe the city is growing out into the country near the house. Maybe. One day the little house was surprised to see a horseless carriage coming down the winding road. Well, a horseless carriage is just another name for a car. And when we talk about a horseless carriage coming down the winding country road, this is what a winding country road might look like. Pretty soon there were more of them on the road and fewer carriages pulled by horses. So that'd be a carriage pulled by a horse. Pretty soon along came some surveyors and surveyed a line in front of the house. And a surveyor is somebody that figures out where to put roads and other things. It's kind of like trying to map out the road to see where to put it and how high and when to turn it and when to go straight. Pretty soon along came a steam shovel and dug a road. So there's a steam shovel, and it is used hot water and steam to power it until they can't use it to dig up stuff to like make roads a long time ago. Not now, a long time ago. Pretty soon along came a steam shovel and dug a road through the hill covered with daisies. Then some trucks came and dumped big stones on the road. Then some trucks with little stones. Then some trucks with tar and sand. And finally a steamroller came and rolled it all smooth, and the road was done. So that's what tar looks like, and we see that on our roads today. If you see a road that is black looking, it probably means it has tar on it, which is kind of black and sticky before it gets driven on. Now the little house watched the trucks and automobiles, which are cars, going back and forth to the city, gasoline stations, roadside stands, which looks like that, a place you can stop and buy vegetables and fruits, and small houses followed the new road. Everyone and everything moved much faster now than before. So look what's happening here. The city is growing out and out and out, and it's starting to get really close to the little house that used to be in the country, but now there are houses that are its neighbors. More roads were made, and the countryside was divided into lots, and lots are just small pieces of land. More houses and bigger houses, apartment houses and tenement houses. Tenement houses are just really apartment houses. Schools, stores, and garages spread over the land and crowded around the little house. No one wanted to live in here and take care of her anymore. Talking about the house. She couldn't be sold for gold or silver, so she just stayed there and watched. So they're building these big buildings around her, but the little house is just staying right there, because it's not supposed to be sold or torn down. Now it was not so quiet and peaceful at night. Now the lights of the city were bright and very close, and the street lights shone all night. "This must be living in the city," thought the little house, and didn't know whether she liked it or not. She missed the field of daisies and the apple trees dancing in the moonlight. So you see, it's just the lights are shining all night long. She's out, the house is just sitting there thinking, I'm finally surrounded by the city, and I'm not sure if I like it because it's just so noisy and so fast and so dirty, and not sure if it likes it at all. Pretty soon there were trolley cars, and this is a trolley car, and this is another trolley car, and a lot of times they were run on electricity. Trolley cars going back and forth in front of the little house. They went back and forth all day and part of the night. Everyone seemed to be very busy and everyone seemed to be in a hurry. And so they put trolley cars right in front of the house. The house is still there and all these other bigger apartments are around it. Pretty soon there was an elevated train. So there's a trolley car below and then above is an elevated train, which sits above the ground where the cars drive and the trucks. And that's what a real elevated train looks like. And again, it's up above and they still use them today. The air was filled with dust and smoke, and the noise was so loud that it shook the little house. Now she couldn't tell when spring came or summer or fall or winter. It all seemed about the same. So she's just kind of blocked by all the buildings around her. Pretty soon there was a subway going back and forth underneath the house. And so see, there's the house, and below the house was a subway that runs underground. And this is what a real subway might look like. She couldn't see it, but she could feel and hear it. People were moving faster and faster. No one noticed the little house anymore. They hurried by without a glance, without even just a quick look at the little house. They just went by because it was just sitting there and nobody was living there, and it was just getting in bad shape, getting run down. Pretty soon they tore down the apartment houses and tenement houses around the little house and started digging big cellars like basements, one on each side. The steam shovels dug down 3 stories on one side. And when they talk about like buildings and stories, a story is about how far it is to the ceiling of your room, just a little bit taller than from the floor to the ceiling of your room. So each story is about that far. And 4 stories on the other side. Pretty soon they started building up. They built up 25 stories on one side and 35 stories on the other. Whew, big buildings. And then this little house is all there by itself. Now the little house only saw the sun at noon because everything was blocking the sun, and didn't see the moon or stars at night at all because the lights of the city were too bright. She didn't like living in the city. At night she used to dream of the country and the field of daisies and the apple trees dancing in the moonlight. And there she is, kind of squished between those 2 big buildings. The little house was very sad and lonely. Her paint was cracked and dirty. Her windows were broken and her shutters hung crookedly. She looked shabby, which means in bad shape, though she was just as good a house as ever underneath. So they're saying she looked in bad shape, but she was really built pretty well. And this is what cracked paint looks like. Just means paint that's old. And this is what a crooked shutter. These are shutters, and this is what a crooked shutter might look like. Then one fine morning in spring, along came the great-great-granddaughter of the man who built the little house so well. She saw the shabby little house, but she didn't hurry by. There was something about the little house that made her stop and look again. She said to her husband, "That little house looks just like the little house my grandmother lived in when she was a little girl, only that little house was way out in the country on a hill covered with daisies and apple trees growing around. So she's thinking, that can't be the house. The house I'm thinking of was in the country, but this used to be in the country before the city grew around it, right? They found out it was the very same house, so they went to the movers to see if the house could be moved. I'll show you what a moving looks like. There's the moving the house. The movers looked the little house all over and said, sure, this house is as good as ever. She's built so well, we could move her anywhere. So they jacked up the little house, which means they kind of like lifted up off the ground, and put her on wheels, and which they can do. Traffic was held up for hours as they slowly moved her out of the city. And this is what a real house moving might look like. They jack it up, which means they lift up off the ground, and they put these wheels on it, and they have this big truck or trucks, and then they pull it to its new place. At first, the little house was frightened, but after she got used to it, she rather liked it. They rolled along the big road, and they rolled along the little roads until they were way out in the country. When the little house saw the green grass and heard the birds singing, she didn't feel sad anymore. They went along and along, but they couldn't seem to find just the right place. They tried the little house here, and they tried her there. Finally, they saw a little hill in the middle of a field and apple trees growing around. There, said the great-great-granddaughter. That's just the place. Yes, it is, said the little house to herself. A cellar was dug, which is a basement, on top of the hill, and slowly they moved the house from the road to the hill. The windows and shutters were fixed, and once again they painted her a lovely shade of pink. As the little house settled down on her new foundation, she smiled happily. Once again she could watch the sun and moon and stars. Once again she could watch spring and summer and fall and winter come and go. Once again she was lived in and taken care of. It almost looks like she's smiling in that picture, doesn't it, because of the sidewalk? Never again would she be curious about the city. Never again would she want to live there. The stars twinkled above her. A new moon was coming up. It was spring, and all was quiet and peaceful in the country.